Hi, Optimus. Today's story took place in October 2016 when I was still in high school. As a sophomore, I felt like I was in a pretty awkward place. I wasn't a freshman anymore, which was nice because freshmen at my school were often looked down upon for being annoying and acting like idiots in the hallway all the time. However, I still wasn't an upperclassman, so it was hard to find my place in social circles around school. It didn't help that I was constantly in AP classes and had a bit of a reputation as an antisocial kid who just stuck to his homework and band. I wasn't really invited to parties all too often unless it was a friend's basement or something, and even then, they weren't really official parties. More or less, the biggest party I'd ever attended in high school up until this point involved around 5 or 6 people playing Smash Brothers or another game in a basement, eating pizza, essentially what you would call a sleepover. But I remember going to school at the beginning of the week and randomly getting an invite from another kid in band who I was acquainted with to what they said was going to be a massive school party. Pretty much everyone in school was supposed to go, so they passed word on to me and other people during band. It was supposed to take place on Friday night, right after school, which was good because I finally had no weekend plans. Keep in mind, my family often would travel 4.5 hours out of state to visit my older sister in college, and I also had band to tend to sometimes when we would go to competitions. Anyway, I was extremely nervous for this party, and honestly, I contemplated not showing up at all. I mean, I felt like I would be out of my element. Not only was I known for being antisocial, I didn't really know anyone at this party. So, who was I gonna talk to? Who was I gonna be around? I mean, at the time, I was only 15 years old, and I knew that many of the people who were going to be there were going to be upperclassmen who could be anywhere from 16 years old to actual 18-year-old adults about to go to college. Regardless, I had finally been invited to one of the big parties at school. Keep in mind, our school had actually been newsworthy due to the partying culture that previous classes had. We live in somewhat of a small town, so it was a somewhat tight-knit community. Multiple kids had been seriously injured in drinking and driving accidents over the decades, so parents were extremely wary about letting kids go to these kinds of parties. This led to a culture of kids sneaking out of their parents' houses to attend parties and waiting for their parents to basically leave on trips or be out of town for the weekend before they would host them. Essentially, none of these parties had any sort of adult supervision unless you want to include the completely intoxicated 18-year-old seniors that would often show up. These parties also had a tendency to get violent. Our town has 2 high schools and they're massive rivals for one another. Both schools play each other yearly in football and other sports, and each matchup was treated like everything was on the table. Unfortunately, due to the rivalry and the beef between the 2 schools, a tendency to crash one another's parties also unfolded. Overall, I quickly realized that attending this party on Friday night could actually be somewhat dangerous. I knew that there would be drugs and alcohol presented there, and a good amount of people would likely get involved with it. Without any sort of buffer to prevent anything bad from happening, these parties quickly gained a reputation as being grounds for drunken fights, sexual harassment, and random high school rivalry party crashes. If I were to go Friday night, I could actually put myself at risk. However, the offer was basically too good to pass up. Never experiencing one of these parties felt weird, and I personally wanted to try and make new friends at the party and see if I could maybe find my way a little bit more socially at school. So I decided to still go. Keep in mind, there was still basically the whole rest of the week left before the party, so I had to wait it out. But towards the middle of the week, that's when things started getting interesting. I heard people talking about the party through the hallways constantly in the next few days. Apparently, the wide receiver on our football team, who by the way was a 5-star football recruit and had active offers from multiple Division I colleges, had gotten into some sort of social media argument with players from the rival high school. His dad and uncle both played in the NFL, so unfortunately this kid had kind of an ego. He was known for being somewhat of a dick around school and also outside of school. Most people thought that because he thought he had offers to go to college full ride for football, that it allowed him to treat anyone however he wanted and talk to people however he wanted. Online, he got into a massive argument that spilled over with multiple people from the rival high school. And people around our school were rumoring that one of the rival players was planning to come to the party on Friday with a gun and find the football player in question. A few people changed their minds on going to the party, fearing that the violence might become too much of a threat to go, but honestly, I didn't believe this was going to happen. While fights were common at these parties, not one time that I had known of at least had anyone been shot or killed at a high school party in our town. But other rumors about the party began making rounds at our school in the few days before the party too. For instance, a bunch of freshmen planned to try and sneak into the party, like 20 of them, and see if they'd get caught and thrown out. It wasn't that freshmen were explicitly banned from going to these parties, but they usually never got invited due to the class's reputations of acting immature. Regardless, I still planned on going. It wasn't often that I had a weekend to myself, and it was even less often that I was being invited to an occasion like this. The day before the party is when things started to change for me and I began reconsidering going for real. Remember how our star wide receiver got into a social media beef with the rival high school and they threatened to shoot him? Well, the beef continued on social media. Like a complete idiot, our star wide receiver showed his gun on his Instagram page and threatened some people from the rival high school, saying that if they showed up at the party on Friday to attack him, that he would kill all of them. This was stupid for two reasons. Number one, he was essentially egging them on to attack him and prove themselves, and number two, this guy was being recruited by high-tier colleges for a free ride scholarship, and this social media post was likely to throw that all into the trash for him. Instead of scaring the rival high schoolers, it only antagonized them further. They guaranteed he'd be attacked at the party on Friday and that anyone who stepped in their way would also get hurt. On top of this, there was rumors of the freshmen trying to infiltrate the party to worry about, and now a rumor was swirling that the local police department had been monitoring the threats online after someone at our school snitched. This was confirmed true when our school had an emergency assembly the day of the party. Fast forward to that Friday morning. When we all walked into school, police officers were directing us to the auditorium for an emergency assembly. There were even K-9 units at our school and armed tactical guards that looked like SWAT units. Immediately, kids started panicking in the hallways, believing that there was potentially some sort of shooting or a bomb in the school, but when we got to the auditorium, we were all single-filed into the bleachers, and the principal came out. In short, he told us that the school knew about the party, the police knew about the party, and that anyone caught from our school at the party would be suspended to the maximum extent possible, and that any seniors caught would be academically punished, which could cause some of the lower-performing students to not graduate. We were given an hour-long speech about the dangers of alcohol, drugs, and partying. We were spoken to about the death threats against one another, and that this petty high school rivalry should never lead to anything like this. The most insane thing about it, though, was that representatives of one of the colleges our star wide receiver was getting an offer from were actually there. After the assembly, I saw them speaking in private with the kid, and from what I understand, they apparently informed him that the scholarship offer was withdrawn due to his behavior on and off social media. Understandably, the school simply got sick and tired of trying to work with the kid and his family to get him on the right path and realized there was really no saving him. He lost his mind after this. He started screaming and freaking out and went into one of the hallways outside the auditorium and punched a dent into one of the lockers. He was taken to the office and no one saw him for the rest of the day. But towards the end of the day, the same person who told me about the party informed me there was going to be a change of plans. Apparently, the old address the party was to take place at was now outdated, and a new person was hosting the party to throw off the school and the cops and hopefully any threat to anyone there. On top of this, everyone who was actually invited was written down in one of the students' cell phones who was planning the party to prevent anyone from sneaking in or getting into the party to cause problems. A few of the football players were designated as lookouts and bouncers, essentially. The only reason I even considered going to this party at this point was because of these changes. I felt a lot better that the students hosting it made efforts to keep people safe and move the party from trouble. I still planned to go, and was excited my name made the list. This was because a good word was put in about me by a few of the people in band with me towards the people planning the party, which honestly I appreciated. But after school let out, I went home and relaxed for a few hours. I distinctly remember the time the party started, which was 10 p.m. Now at 9:30, I was out the door and walking to the party, which was only a few blocks from my house on the other side of the highway that divides our town in half. Leaving at 10 o'clock would have made my parents too suspicious, but 9:30, they would have still thought I was going to a friend's. Eventually, I made it there and I was led into the party. It was a surreal experience. I mean, the music was so loud, there were dozens of people packed into this family home and backyard, and alcohol was literally everywhere. Unattended cups and cans of beer, bottles of liquor in the kitchen, bottles laying all over the backyard. Some of the people hosting the party were already drunk because they'd been drinking for hours while setting everything up. People were smoking weed in every room of the house, and some of the kids, rumored, went upstairs and were experimenting with psychedelic drugs that one of the people from school brought. It was already pretty chaotic compared to what I expected, but I began to drink from a beer can and I tried talking to some new people. I found this group of 4 people who were actually on the basketball team, and they were really nice to me. They were all juniors and seniors, and I would say they sort of took me under their wing that night, if that makes any sense. They helped introduce me to new people, and I spent my night drinking with them, getting to know them, and having a great time. Eventually, we all started taking shots of the liquor provided to us. They were pressuring me into drinking faster than I was comfortable with, but I didn't want to seem weak or like a loser, so I just kind of went on with it. Within like a half hour, I'd gotten down 8 shots and 3 beers. I'm a pretty small guy, so this was a lot for me, especially since I wasn't the most experienced drinker. After a while, we were all pretty shit-faced drunk. I was succeeding in what I came here to do and found some new friends, but the fun didn't last long. The star wide receiver finally arrived at the party with his football buddies, and everything immediately went south. They were treating people at the party like shit, being obnoxious and wasting alcohol, pouring it all out and knocking people's drinks over. But a little while later after that, shit actually hit the fan. The people from the rival high school somehow found out about the party being moved and showed up. There was about 7 of them, and they were able to easily get past any lookouts that were set up, as there just weren't enough people to prevent them from coming in. Worst of all though, they really had a gun with them. They eventually found the wide receiver they were looking for and pulled the gun out. People scattered everywhere, and this was all about 20 feet from me. The moment I saw the pistol come out, I booked it with everyone else. People fled into the house and began locking all the doors and windows. The people argued outside and were challenging one another. The star wide receiver who posted his gun to Instagram didn't have his gun on him, which was kind of ironic because now he was really face to face with these people and he didn't really seem to know what to do. The whole tough guy persona kind of just evaporated. Apparently, in the heat of the moment, someone called the police, and minutes later, 4 police cars pulled up out front of the house. Someone screamed that the cops were here, and people just started booking it from the house. I mean, literally dozens of high schoolers were running out the front and back doors, hopping the backyard fence, running through the now open garage door and hiding in the trees behind the neighborhood. I lost all my new friends in the commotion, and I was all alone, but at this point, I didn't know what to do, but my instincts kicked in. 2 of the cop cars started driving down the streets after the kids running, and a few kids were caught and arrested pretty quickly. The other police officers started sweeping the property. I didn't want to get arrested, so I hopped the backyard fence and ran about 100 feet into the tree line. I was running for less than a minute before I tripped and fell into a little dip in the ground. It was deep enough for me to be able to lay and hide in, and since it was fall getting ready to be winter, there were a lot of leaves on the ground. This might sound funny, but drunkenly, I started piling leaves all over myself in this little divot in the ground, trying to camouflage myself before the police started coming back here. I was freezing and drunk down in this pile of leaves for what felt like forever before the police started sweeping the tree line looking for drunk teenagers like me. A police officer walked literally right past the pile of leaves that contained me and kept going into the forest. I was genuinely terrified. Within maybe like a half hour, I had nearly been arrested, became shit-faced drunk, nearly saw a kid get killed, and ran from the police. Eventually, the police rounded up what they could and they left. The rival high schoolers were arrested for having guns, some kids were arrested for underage drinking and drug use, and I narrowly escaped it all. My parents would have killed me had I been caught. After it was all said and done, I simply just started sprinting home as best as I could, drunk and cold. When I got home, my parents clearly knew that I was drunk. They were mad, but not as mad as they would have been had I been arrested at this party. They let me go to my room and I simply collapsed in my bed and slept the drunkenness away. I woke up the next morning thinking I dreamed the whole thing, but when we returned to school on Monday, I knew it wasn't a dream. In total, about 30 kids were suspended from school to the maximum extent. 4 seniors ended up not graduating due to academic punishments, multiple people were arrested, and I somehow escaped scot-free with a story. I'd say it was a success even till this day. So that's the first story we've done here on the new Storytime channel. I do want to go ahead and say that I appreciate this fan submission. I also want to remind you guys, if you want to put your Twitter or something like that in your guys' story for a shout out, that you can. This person submitted this story anonymously, which is also acceptable, but if you guys want like a Twitter shout out or something, go ahead and submit your stories at optimistales@gmail.com. Yeah, that's optimistales@gmail.com. Anyway, thank you guys for watching the video, and until my next one, this is Optimus Tales, signing out.